Well, welcome back to another episode with Express with Matt. I'm here with Jennifer. Very excited for joining me today, Jennifer. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Matt. How are you?
Doing awesome. Well, Jennifer, first question we ask everyone who joins us is what you got in the coffee cup today? What are you drinking?
Yeah, so today's cup is actually chai tea with lavender, and I am a little bit of a snob on that aspect that I have to have my almond milk. So,
A chai tea with lavender. So I have my normal double espresso, which gets me through the day. It's funny you talk about lavender. I'll share a story for a second, real quick. My father-in-law went out to dinner with him like a year or two ago, kind of a gourmet restaurant. Had a nice meal with him, and he ordered the lavender uh, creme brulee for dessert. He hated it, and
oh,
and he described it as he was eating a bar of soap. And so most normal people, once they take a bite of something, would stop eating it, right? Not him. Just out of pure stubbornness, ate the entire thing. I'm like, why? What we switch? He goes, no, I ordered. I should eat it. And so I don't know if you would like your chai tea with lavender, but I love the smell of lavender. And right around the corner, a few miles from us, there's a farm that actually grows lavender, and it's gorgeous, gorgeous. So, well, I really appreciate you joining. And again, as we said many times in the show, we're open to all beverages here. So,
love it.
so Jennifer, do us a favor. One of the things I was really looking forward to talking to you. I've been following your content for a year, looking at your web pages and all the work and amazing things you're doing. Really excited about talking to you. But can you give to the audience a little bit of an overview of your career and what you're doing right now as your business, if you will?
Yeah, I feel like I've had a career journey that has masked every aspect you could probably think of. I've done everything from behavioral health specialist for early intervention for children with autism. The last 12 years, I have actually been working as a recruiter. I started out working from the RPO, which stands for Recruitment Placement Outsourcing. Then I went into in-house corporate roles. And now I am currently running my own recruitment agency that's in the healthcare sector and also simultaneously running a career coaching business.
So no moss growing on your stone. You're keeping yourself pretty busy. One of the things that was really fascinating to me looking at your profile and looking at some of the content you put out, and which really kind of spoke to me, is the blend of your authentic self to your career path and how you bring your values and your passions and your personality to the work. You're very transparent on your webpage and your coaching and about the type of work that's what's mission driven for you. Um, I think that's really, really awesome. And you come out unique these days. Tell me how you kind of got to that, crossroads where you really put your values first and found your career from there. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think some of the freedom, just to be very transparent, that I found is in being an entrepreneur and being in charge of my own industry, I did find that I had a little bit more freedom. But I will approach the subject of even when I was still working in corporate, I was finding ways to incorporate the reality of who I am and what were important values to me. Maybe not as far as I'm able to toe that line now with being my own manager, my own boss, and running my own company. But I do think it's really important for us, especially in profiles like LinkedIn, to be able
Yeah.
to align what those values are. And it can be things as simple as I'm looking for companies that have strong ethics. I'm looking for companies that value honesty and integrity. So peeling apart and kind of pulling back to those layers that are important and really commenting and posting on people's posts that are reacting and that are sharing those details. I think it's really important to engage with people that have similar mindsets.
Jennifer, you bring up that point about entrepreneur versus corporate. And, I can tell you, some of the work I've done over the years when I did have a role in an organization was along the lines of engagement and also DE&I and surveys and the Great Place to Work surveys and stuff like that. And the theme kept coming up over and over again when we started doing the work. Can people bring their authentic self to work? do people feel comfortable bringing their authentic self to work as a key indicator? And if I could share just a quick example, we had this example of a survey. I was looking through some of the data, and there was a question basically about I have a disability, was the question. And I looked at the percentage of people who responded yes, was pretty high. It was pretty high in my organization. And I started thinking to myself, there's no way that this many people have talked about having a disability. And so these are people who are saying on an anonymous survey they have a disability, yet they're not telling their employer they have the disability. Maybe they don't need to, or maybe they don't feel comfortable with it. It always stuck with me about, are we creating an environment where people can be their authentic self within, you know, the ground rules of that? What was the conflict you found with that about being your authentic self at work and creating an environment you felt comfortable with versus, do I share too much? How do you manage that kind of, you know, duality there, if you will? Not duality,
Yeah.
it's not the right word, but
No, Matt, that's a fantastic question. And I am going to answer, I think it is very specific to the organization that you are currently in. I think there are some organizations that are a lot more open and they're
yeah,
willing to allow you to have that openness and to speak. And there's some organizations that unfortunately you will be negatively looked at or downtrodden if you do speak up. And so if you're that person, how do you figure out if your organization has that safety and availability? I think the biggest piece is to find a valued resource and a trusted advocate that is in a position of leadership that you can have a one-on-one confidential conversation. Maybe dip your toes in the water, test and see through that conversation how their response is, and then see how that goes. Once that conversation has happened, that's going to allow you to really see where's the organization going to follow from that point.
yeah. It's such an important discussion. I was with a group of HR professionals on a Zoom call a few weeks ago. We're talking about being in the job market, looking for roles. There was a whole discussion about, do you leave DE&I in your resume or you take it out these days? And personally, I said, look, I'm proud of the work I've done in that role. I'm proud of it. I want to work in an organization that values that. I get the language is changing over the times. I don't feel comfortable taking that off my resume because that's not where I want to land. I want to land in an environment that does value differences of opinions and discussions and stuff like that. But it's an environment where I think we just need to listen to more people and hear their stories more, and it really comes down to that. And when you open yourself up to being so transparent as an entrepreneur, where has that led you as far as your clientele, the work you're doing? Um, you seem committed to this pathway, and it seems like it's really helping you. Talk about that for a little bit, if you will.
Yeah, I think it really helps me to align with the type of clientele that align with the same values.
Yeah,
And the other piece is that I have noticed, whether it's a client from a recruiting aspect or a client that I'm coaching, because the values are in that similar space, there's a whole level of trust. I feel like oftentimes when we're working with an unknown or someone that we really don't have that rapport with, there's a little bit of the fear of the unknown. And by me having that risk and being vulnerable and authentic to who I am, it almost deadens or even lessens what that unknown variable is. So people come into an initial conversation already with that curtain open because I've been very transparent as far as what my beliefs are and who I am. That when we have those conversations, it's like jumping into a conversation where we've been in contact or we've known each other for years. And so it does take a lot of that just initial weirdness and awkwardness off the table.
well, it's a great way of putting it. And I've had so many conversations about this over the last few months about finding an authentic voice and finding an authentic brand, right? And it doesn't mean you pull back the curtain, you go completely to the other left, and you overshare. It just means you get to a point where you have some personality, you have what's important to you. And I can tell you over the last year or so, I've been on this entrepreneurial journey myself. I spent a lot of time really committing to writing my mission, my value statements, my kind of my proposal. And as I kind of gone through those, there's very consistent over the years what I value, what I believe in, but putting a language to it and actually identifying a label in it, it kind of it really helps kind of solidify that. It's almost like when you say, you have a goal in your head, but when you actually say it out loud, it makes it a little more real. Developing that kind of personal brand, I wrote it down, and now, I'm going to share it. And like the next thing, and there's that moment when you push enter, you push send, right? You're like, should I have done that? Was that too much? Did you feel any of that fear? Am I by myself on this, or am I alone in this thought process? Tell me about that.
Not at all. Oh my goodness. I mean, like I said, I had alluded to doing little bits here and there when I was in corporate realms, but I'll be honest, a lot of times because I was a recruiter, I was the face of the company. So I was very limited as far as what I could say in some of my prior roles. And when I made that paradigm shift, it became a, oh, do I really want to put this much of myself out there? And especially when you're thinking LinkedIn, I know there's been a huge paradigm shift in how LinkedIn has been like looked at lately. But it was like I had to even change my own mindset of it's business professional, but that doesn't mean that I have to be stuffy, and it doesn't mean that I have to hide who I truly am. And so there was a little bit of that. Am I going to get clients? Do people want to connect with me? Am I literally putting myself in my own grave by posting these things?
Yeah, this is good therapy for me right now. It really is. I mean, seriously, because it really is that discussion where you're like, what's too much? And you know what? How's the response been for you when you've kind of went through that? How's it gone for you?
It has been just so surprisingly positive. What I've seen is I really haven't had anyone come back at me and be like, how dare you post that? What I have seen on the other side is so many people reach out and literally almost in tears, some of these people, like, oh my goodness, thank you so much for being so vulnerable and for sharing that. I experienced a similar situation and I just didn't know anyone else would live this. And I didn't know that this was normal. And just, I think because of that vulnerability that I'm willing to portray, so many people are seeing that they're not going through these things alone and they're not on an island. And it just opens up the ability to have open conversations. I'm not saying people are posting comments necessarily on my board, but it does open the opportunity for me to get direct messages and to have some more of those conversations. And I think it's so critical right now. We've gone through a change. COVID made us all kind of in our own little island. We're starting to see the paradigm shift where people are doing the return to work, but there's still a bit of that like disconnect as far as you've got your employees who have learned what it feels like to not have to commute. You have your leadership who are like, well, we need people to come in because we're paying millions and billions of dollars for office space, and like this is what we need. And like there's a major disconnect between the two. And I think from that perspective, just knowing that you're not on an island and there are people that have experienced what you've experienced.
And well, yeah, we should, bottle that and sell that because that's exactly what we need more of, is really understanding that we all have this human condition. And part of that human condition is all that frailty of, is anyone going to like me? Or are people going to, sit by me? It goes back to when you're in elementary school, going to lunch for the first time. Who am I sitting next to? And that carries over to work environments. Yeah, and, being able to bring your authentic self to what you do is so keenly important. I think, getting back to COVID and what that's done to us, we have we have a paradox in communication. We have the most amazing communication tools that we've ever had in our human history, yet we connect less and less. And you saw loneliness in America is an epidemic proportions. In some ways we've forgotten how to disagree without getting, ugly about it. We've forgotten how to listen to other points of views in different ways. And we've also forgotten that everything's not polished, so it's interesting when I talk to someone who's really on this journey to find authentic, career passions, um, how that struggle kind of plays itself out a little bit. And Jeff, I really appreciate the way you've blended that in your communication. And it seems like it's a journey you're on. I kind of have a a random question about it. What came first? Was it the chicken or egg type question? Was it the career change kind of led the values kind of thing? But the values core to you say, hey, I have to change what I'm doing because if it's better. How do you kind of go through that process to kind of align the values to your purpose, if you will?
I love this question. And I do think there's a little bit of a duality on this answer, and I'll share why. So the values I do think ultimately came first, and I had been really feeling a bit of a pull for a while when I was still in my corporate role. However, like everyone, and this is that authenticity coming out, I was afraid to leap into the unknown. I had been raised in a you don't take risks, you do what's tried and true and steady. And in January of 2024, my safety net was yanked from underneath of me. And so the fact that that was gone, that really gave me the time to do some introspective time and just thought process through a lot of prayer and really just figuring out what I wanted to do. And I looked at different opportunities. I'd applied for different corporate positions. And like I said, faith is so pivotal to who I am. Through that time, it just became crystal clear to me that working for someone was not the direction that my life was to go any further. And the success that I've seen has been through my entrepreneurial journey. And so when doors open one way and they shut another, that becomes crystal clear as far as where you should go.
Yeah, what an amazing share there, Jen. And what? One thing I want to talk about is that the idea sometimes change is forced upon us, isn't it? And I felt, as I moved on from my last career, I was there for 26 years before I decided to leave. That's a quarter century. In fact, someone said it to me, Matt, you were here a quarter century. I'm like, oh man, you hear phrase it that way. But you kind of feel like you're on a path you can't get off this train, right? And sometimes when changes kind of occurs, it forces you to really sit down and look at the values and look at what's core to you. Look as a wonderful opportunity. And as I've worked with so many leaders, so many people in transition, so many entrepreneurs over the last few months, that kind of self-reflection, however it's done, through prayer, through actual sitting down and writing it down, through counseling, through however, is so key to find that next step. Is to look inward and say, what is important to me?
Yeah.
What makes me happy in the morning? And how can I move forward with this? It's such wonderful advice for career and life in general. And there's so many out there right now with so much change going on, layoffs, career changes, a whole bunch of forces are working against their traditional work environment. People are being forced more and more to look inward to find this. What advice would you give someone who's kind of facing that life change, who maybe lost their job or is going through a life transition, or maybe just so unhappy with what they're doing now, to maybe take the next step? Well, where do you start?
Yeah, I my favorite place to start is I am a firm believer of you have to break it down to build it back up. And so when I am working with my direct coaching clients, that's where I start. It's literally go back to basics. What are your hobbies? What are your interests? What are your talents? And where do those intersect? How does that align with what's important for you from a value system? And that's where we start to look at what's going to be that next stepping stone. I think the biggest piece to remember, though, regardless of what's leading to that change, is that it has nothing to do with a negative impact of who you are, and just to really find that truth of you are a unique individual, and no matter what you bring to the table, it is a unique and special gift and skill set that only you can bring. And don't let that negative impact you and wear you down so much that that becomes all that's all consuming.
I hope you're writing that down out there if you're watching this episode. What great advice, Jennifer. And I think it also goes to one thing I would add to that is that it doesn't discount all the great work you do, all the learning you did. When things change and there's a layoff or a transition happens or whatever, you don't throw away all the great work you did. That's still there. It's still part of your journey. It's part of your things. As every journey starts and ends, and there's been multiple journeys in a person's career and life. And part of that is kind of embracing that process of, hey, I don't regret 1 minute what happened, even though the ending maybe wasn't exactly how I planned it. Not many people, if you're a football fan, get to win the Super Bowl and ride off like John Elway did. Most people don't do that. You know, um, very few
Yeah.
actually do that. And I can tell you, one of the things I did when I first joined HR in my last organization, I was there for about 12 years and I promoted HR, was I was organizing the old pension plans, which is I think they were hazing me, Jennifer, to be honest with you. But that means that, like, and I realized I was looking at these people's files who worked there for 30 years, 25 years, 30 years. Part of me was like, how many got to retire when they wanted to? How many had to retire maybe because a family member was sick or a job line or a service line was closed or
Yeah.
these people who dedicate years, and I thought about that a lot, is that, changes can happen in your life. It doesn't discount that. So it's such a wonderful perspective and really starting there and sitting down, looking inward and saying, what's important to me? First step on the journey. Great advice, Jennifer. Really amazing advice. You're progressing in your career. You're doing some different things now. Tell me about what's next. Kind of where you taking this call and this effort moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is for me, I just really feel like I am being called to really dive headfirst and put a lot of passion into my career coaching business. For me, some of that, and I'll just be super transparent, some of it comes from my own journey. I spent 25 years myself in corporate, and I have worked in so many different industries. I feel like there's a huge chasm right now for especially professional women that are mid-career, especially if they're between the ages of 30 and 50 and they are juggling young children, children that are graduating, they're facing empty nests, but now they're also juggling aging parents. And how do you move through that transition and how do you maintain your career and keep true to the values? And so that's really my ideal client base. And that's where I really hope to encourage and inspire other people on their career journeys.
Well, obviously, it's such an important discussion because it really is a challenging time. You really laid it out pretty well. And right now, especially with so much change happening, there's so many people I've been talking to have been in careers for 20, 25 years. They get them right in that 45 to 55, range, and now are forced to look differently. And um, and I think if people can't pivot in a certain way, I don't know how to say I don't think what they're looking for, if it's a replacement of exactly what they had, that train's probably left the station a lot of times. So it's an important work, and I would encourage anyone out there. Um, Jennifer's a wonderful resource to look for, especially if you find yourself in that kind of category. Is a great niche to work with. So how do we get in contact with you if people want to talk to you from there?
Yeah, so I think the best way is just to connect through my website, and that is www.sjmcoaching.co. And yes, it is .co, not .com.
Very cool. We'll put that in a slide through the presentation, so make sure you go from there. Now we get to our favorite part of the day, which is our espresso round questions, or a few quick hitters here. Now I know you're drinking the chai tea with lavender, which sounds like a wonderful drink, to be honest with you. But what is the best piece of advice you ever got over a tea or coffee in your career? And you want to share that with everyone?
I think the biggest piece and best was to not sweat the small things. I tend to definitely overanalyze and I have a lot of self-criticism because I'm very type A. And my best manager was the one that said, everyone's going to make mistakes, take them as a learning bridge and just move on.
That's an amazing advice. My wife will tell me every once in a while. Matt, no one's else is thinking about that but you. So sometimes we get in our own head and our own way so many times. It's such wonderful advice to really say, hey, look, is that going to matter 5 minutes from now? Is that going to matter 5 years from now? And sometimes having that wisdom to be able to move forward from that is such an important thing. Jennifer, a lot of leaders watch the show, and if you can sit down with them over a cup of coffee or tea, what advice would you give them?
I think it would follow that same trajectory is, just be willing to take risks and don't let small things bother you. And along with that is be a person like you teach the good thing like your mother always teaches you be the friend that other people want you to be or be a friend like you want. And I think that's so important even in the workforce is be the kind of colleague, be the kind of employee, be the kind of person that you would like someone else to be, and I just keeping that reciprocal value.
That golden rule, it's hard to get over that. It's a very, very powerful way of justifying how you act. I often thought about that when I was making decisions as a leader. I thought to myself, like, if I had to be on the 6 o'clock news and they showed me what I was doing here, would I be embarrassed or proud of what I did? You can make bad decisions, but if the intent is there and the thought process is there, you usually will make moral, ethical decisions that you can live with, even if they're wrong. But that's such great advice. So, everyone's favorite question: you go back, have a cup of coffee with a younger Jennifer, and give some advice to yourself. What advice are you giving yourself?
Yeah, I love this one. I think the biggest advice that I would give myself is to take risks. Like I didn't do it. I didn't take risks. And I think I'm learning now, the age that I'm at, risks are not going to break you. Like you can take calculated risks, but they're not going to break you and you're going to learn from them.
You really are inspiring what you've done. About a little over a year now, you've kind of built all this up, and it's been pretty impressive to watch. And you should be absolutely so proud of yourself for what you've accomplished. And again, it is scary when you put that out there to the world. I'm doing this, and then but a lot of great rewards. So more power to you. Great job with that. Our final espresso round question: you can have a cup of coffee or tea with anyone, any place, any time. Who are you having a cup of coffee with?
Zig Ziglar.
Wow, well, that's one of my favorites. Yeah, why him?
I just think he had a wealth of information and it was more than even just in your career journey. Like he was so wise in how he addressed and how he handled things in general. I just think he would have so much additional insight. I mean, how many of us look at the quotes that he has, and that's just a tiny, tiny little slice of who he was. I can only imagine what it would be like to sit down and have coffee with him and have a really in-depth conversation.
That is an awesome one, and someone I haven't heard on the show. So that's very cool. So that's a really good example. Well, Jennifer, I really have to thank you for this conversation. Um, I think the way you've blended, your personal journey, your authentic voice, your values, with quite frankly a real need out there, it's really been brilliantly well done. And I appreciate you sharing some insight here, having a fun discussion here. And I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, to the next cup. See you soon.
Thank you.